Well, folk, here we go. My first guest is Garret Barnwell, a psychologist who has got a practice in Johannesburg here. He has been both supportive to me in my own trials and tribulations as an activist, because he really does get the deeper messaging, which I sometimes in my enthusiasm tend to confuse people about. And I'm reminded of that joke that says, you know, the art of a good educator is take what people experience as confusing and present it back to them as challenging. Well, I tend to have the effect of taking what people experience as challenging and put it back to them as confusing. So thankfully I've got Garret who's going to help you make sense of all this. So Garret, tell us about yourself. You wouldn't have become a psychologist if you didn't have a deep love and care for people. So tell us a little bit of your own journey.
Yeah, so John, thanks as well for inviting me, and it's really a privilege. And whilst we're trying to practice physical distancing, but social solidarity. I'm a clinical psychologist. So I've got a practice here in Joburg where I see clients. The depth of that practice really started before being a psychologist. And that was working around the world with Doctors Without Borders. At that time, I worked in Turkey and Lebanon, Somaliland, during the Horn of Africa crisis, and then also more locally here in Rustenburg, the center of platinum mining belt and a stone throw from Marikana, where the massacre happened a couple of years ago. I think for me, those moments really deepened my understanding of the human condition, and it's still something that I'm learning. Not only seeing the reality, the kind of shadow of the world, and stuff like that, for instance, war in Syria, but also seeing the importance of compassion and solidarity in times like this. So now specifically thinking about Corona and the meaning that can be found in these times.
Now, you talked about knowledge. I mean, the point is it's beyond anything that people have really been trained for now. How have you been sustained in your own work not to give up?
I think Corona, it flattens the playing field because we're all in the same boat in different ways, and suffering in different ways, and finding meaning in different ways. But I mean, a couple of weeks ago, there was no precedent to this. We're slowly getting to understand what's going on at the moment and adapting accordingly and stuff. The lack of information is quite overwhelming, and how to support someone during that time is quite overwhelming. And I think that's maybe something special about these moments. Your kind of theoretical knowledge, it is there, and there is a lot in terms of trauma and stuff, so I also don't want to downplay that. But it really becomes dismantled, and you're left with really the human bond in these moments. And I think that's where the real kind of therapeutic alliance comes out, is in that relationship.
But now it must be difficult for you because your clients needing you now. You've got a busy practice counseling people through various crises and traumas and therapeutic processes. Say a bit about how you are functioning at the moment.
So a couple of weeks back, I think there was ambivalence. A lot of people have adapted. And I think so what was difficult for some people a week or two ago, not in terms of therapy, but in terms of just change in behavior, practicing social distancing, is completely different now. If you could do in-person therapy, I mean, that's really the goal. You get so much out of that in-person interaction. I think that what this moment's showing us is that you can still form connections via these online platforms and stuff. So, but yeah, it's interesting in a way. What I find with doing therapy online is you're also a lot more mindful.
I received a very encouraging one from one of my friends, Catherine Hunter, from a teacher in China reflecting on the lockdown. Let me just read some of those paragraphs because
Cool.
it corresponds exactly with what you're saying. Now, this is somebody who's just finished 7 weeks of being maybe housebound and 7 weeks of uncertainty. He says, we are healthy, we are happy, and we are humbled. Because you strike me as the sort of guy that manifests those qualities too. He says we are now allowed to move freely around with a green QR code so that we can show what we've got our temperature taken. When you get your temperature taken everywhere, it's just become part of the routine. Most restaurants and shopping centres are now open, life's coming back to the city. As we watch the rest of the world begin their time inside, here are some of my reflections of the last 7 weeks. Accept that you have no control over the situation. Let go of any thoughts of trying to plan too much for the next month or two. Things change so fast. Don't be angry and annoyed at the system. Anxiety goes down and you make the best of the situation, whatever that might be for you. Accept that this is what it is and things will get easier. Secondly, try not to listen to, read, and watch too much media. Well, excluding John Clarkson puts it. But the point she's making is that it will drive you crazy. There is such a thing as too much. Thirdly, the sense of community I felt during this time was incredible. I could choose who I wanted to spend my energy on, who I wanted to call, message, and connect with, and found the quality of my relationships has improved. My gosh, so there you're already seeing. Now, let me pause there and ask you, there's another 3 or 4 that I want to also run past.
So thinking about the lockdown, at the moment, people are adapting. And I think that that's what's quite incredible about this moment is how quickly we are adapting. So I follow, as you know, John, and I know you do as well, the climate change, issues around climate change and stuff. And what was considered to be politically impossible a couple of, say, before Corona, has been shown in Corona, actually you can change a lot of behaviors quite quickly if the threat is perceived to be an actual threat. At a more kind of personal level and stuff, people are finding ways to adapt as well. I think that you've seen a buzz on WhatsApp and telephone calls, people reaching out to one another. Yeah, at that time as well, I think just to also acknowledge that many people do still struggle to adapt during times like these. And so this moment does hold both a nice word that a friend of mine, Alex Laferna, uses is defiant hope. So knowing the circumstances, knowing that there is suffering, but still being defiant in that moment to create change. And I'm part of a group called the Climate Psychology Alliance. And what's interesting there is, you know, it's a confusing time for many, for clients and stuff. So, and for us, because it's unsettling. There's some positive signs. I'm loving Joburg's clean air at the moment. And so I wake up with all these beautiful birds at the moment, which is very rare. And, but also it's still unsettling in terms of parts of society that we look at. In a way, this is the time that we're in where we need to keep both of those narratives. In a time of crisis, there can sometimes be a tendency to split off one of these narratives, and that we need to find a way to actually hold both of those. Is that, you know, that there's no guarantee to happiness, but there is meaning in suffering or meaning in these circumstances, and in that meaning, the person can draw quite a lot of purpose. Whether it's daily task phoning friends once a day, whether it's supporting a partner who's really stressing out because they're clicking through their phone the whole day and stuff like that, or making a dinner at home, all those sense of community that you're saying, you know, the videos that you're doing. What motivated you at this moment?
People only start worrying about health when they experience a health crisis themselves. In a sense, this coronavirus has been a way where we are realizing that the health of the planet is indistinguishable from the health of the human population that live on it. And it's interesting because when I was in WHO at one of their conferences, it was about environmental health, and I said, you know, folk, why doesn't the WHO change its normative definition of health, which reads, health is a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. I said, why don't we add ecological well-being? It was like pushing on an open door. Everybody agreed with me. Because it's all very well and good having a definition of health and trying to impose it. But when people experience the dis-ease, well, only then are they going to then take stock. And I don't want to make that a sort of a judgment on people as saying, you silly people. Because it's so unprecedented. Everybody, I think, is sitting, taking stock and thinking, oh my gosh, couldn't I have done this? And what did I do? And I'm hoping that we will yield a rich harvest from this whole experience in terms of consciousness about the global climate emergency.
Definitely, John. I think one thing that this moment, I think, brings into focus is you know, that we are interconnected in different ways. And in terms of the threat and how we prioritize as well, from a psychological perspective, we always weighing up costs and benefits and priorities and stuff. Corona hit home. It has so many impacts on finances, has impacts on movements, on family and stuff like that. I think that in terms of climate change, we've moved forward from where we were. I think people used to see it as a distant kind of thing, but we've actually been hit with day zero in Cape Town, for instance, the Eastern Cape droughts, the Limpopo, Mpumalanga, the floods in Beira and stuff, and people see it as a more immediate thing. That being said, though, as well, is that, you know, coming again to this whole idea of what we prioritize at the moment, I also worry a bit about, you know, some of the environmental justice issues in some countries. Is climate change is framed, and especially from a psychological perspective, climate change is described as a shift from normal to abnormal. But actually, in fact, a lot of people, climate change is just the exacerbator of already very difficult circumstances. And I think that needs to be taken into account as well. That, you know, my kind of understanding of, I think, what we see with Corona and stuff, people will change behavior. You do get a limited amount of people that have just incredibly high risk tolerance and willing to take the risks in terms of Corona, or maybe don't have the access to information or the means to change. But I think that most people change when they have the means available to them. And I think that's maybe something to learn with the climate change crisis, is how do we help people with adapting? John, with Corona, I think it's cut down, maybe not in the US, but cut out a lot of the politics at the moment, where climate change is quite a dichotomous discussion. You know, you either believe in it or you don't. We can reflect a bit and as we move forward, try to find a bit of the nuance in the issue.
I want to just finish with the last 3 points. Number 5, she says, time goes fast. I still haven't picked up the ukulele I plan to learn, and there are box set TV shows I haven't watched yet. 6, as a teacher, the relationships I've built with my students have only continued to grow. I have loved seeing how independent they are, filming themselves to respond to tasks while also learning essential life skills such as balance, risk-taking, and problem-solving, that even we as adults are still learning. Isn't that lovely to hear?
Yeah.
I mean, that sense of agency that people have now acquired.
Or have always had.
Yes, yeah. They've left it buried almost, yeah.
Yeah.
The final point is you learn to appreciate the little things. Sunshine through the window, flowers blossoming, and being able to enjoy a coffee in a cafe. She says, to those just beginning this journey, you will get through it. Listen to what you're told, follow the rules, and look out for each other. There is light at the end of the tunnel. I just was in touch with a social work colleague of mine this morning. She said she's showing symptoms. And I said I would keep her in mind as I spoke to you, because there's still a lot of fear out there.
And that's what that letter does. I don't think I have to add on any other ways to cope, but I think that there is beauty in the moments of noticing these social contacts, noticing nature, noticing the potential that may come after Corona. But it's also, sitting with also the suffering, not getting panicked about it, but also realizing that there is suffering in the moment. And I think maybe just from a psychological perspective is we're not, many people kind of disconnected from that reality. And I think that this moment really awakens that, again, that life is finite. And I think that there's something in there that's really important for us to reflect on. And it brings a spotlight to the urgency of all these other things that we need to solve after the crisis.
We both drink from the well of wisdom of Viktor Frankl. When I fortunately was able to read his stuff soon after my graduation as a social worker, and now looking back 40 years later, keep rereading it, and I discover that my clients who are in moments of crises have found huge meaning of it. And recently, one of my clients who had to serve a 2-year prison term, he said it also got him through that experience. And there was one phrase which he said, which I'd forgotten about. He says, "When you're in prison, it seems like every moment is an eternity, but the weeks just fly by."
Frankl said something, abnormal reaction in an abnormal situation is normal. Two things that stand out, something that Joanna Macy said and something that Naomi Klein said. So Naomi Klein on Friday gave a talk, and she said, normal before wasn't necessarily normal. The Australian bushfire wasn't necessarily normal. Fires in the Amazon wasn't necessarily normal. So we need to start questioning what normal is. That being said, I think something that Joanna Macy, what her work is rooted in, and it's called the work that reconnects, and she focuses on moving people through these kind of processes of grief and connecting them to a sense of social meaning and action for people and other than human life. The grief that we're going through, we need to honor it. Or the pain that we experience in these moments, we need to honor it. It doesn't take away from the suffering. It connects us, that we are interlinked with others, with life on earth. I think that that's something to savor. It's a scary reality in this moment, but it's also something that can really be quite empowering as we get through this moment and as we rebuild after this.
What does spiritual dimension of it all mean for you and your work and your clients? I mean, how, even Viktor Frankl, when he was interviewed by Carol Charliewood, I remember her asking him a question. She said, Dr. Frankl, you talk about the fact that people's sense of meaning and purpose was a significant correlation with whether they survived the concentration camp. He says, what is it about it? He says, I don't know. I'm just a psychologist. I know that it does work, but you need to talk to theologians and people that are trained in the thing to know why it works. Now, here was a man that survived the concentration camps, and I thought, oh my gosh, it was very humbling for me, because there I was just out of university thinking I had the formulas and recipes to solve everybody's problems, and it's been a deeply humbling experience. Say a bit about that in closing.
What I think is important with Viktor Frankl is, so he was a psychiatrist. He was in the concentration camps, and through that time he found that he was able to cope, but he also recognized in others that they were able to cope through different kinds of, daily meaning, not necessarily a higher sense of meaning but for anyone, a daily sense of meaning, and that was through creative acts. And those creative acts could be, for instance, like the spaces you're creating, John, in the work that you're doing and the dialogues that you're having. And he also said through relationships with others, finding a deeper sense of meaning or deeper sense of connection. And I think that that's a really beautiful narrative that's emerging at the moment is, people aren't contacting one another necessarily because they want to know about frivolous things. They're phoning to actually check in to see if you're okay, because they really want that sense of connection at the moment. And I think that that's quite beautiful, and that definitely does help us during this time. We are going to find ways to maybe even reprioritize afterwards. What's meaning for us is quite an important thought. While what the teacher was saying is, I didn't get through this and didn't get through that and stuff, what I'd say is try to find a moment of solitude every now and then. We've got the privilege that there may be quite a bit of solitude at the moment, and use that time to reflect a bit on the moment that you're in, but also trying to envision, what it is potentially meaningful for you in the future and at the present moment.
Gosh, I could carry on speaking with you another hour, but I can see my producer director Tebogo saying, "John, I told you 20 minutes." Garret, thank you so much. And let me just say to folks, you see what I mean? A tough mind and a very tender heart. And we were talking about Viktor Frankl, and I just remembered he, in his experience in those concentration camps, had kind of felt that he had probably a 1 in 30 chance of surviving. And subsequently, when the research was done and the statistics came in, well, it's exactly what they found. It was more or less the same. 1 in 30 people survived. So that was science, that was kind of statistics, can't argue with it. He said, but what he found interesting is that science couldn't tell which one of the 30 would survive. And he has this lovely phrase, he says, between stimulus and response, there's always a gap, no matter how small it is. And in that gap is a moment for choice. So whilst the statistics are playing out, and you might look at yourself to be kind of in a situation of risk, no epidemiologist or doctor or social worker can tell you what's going to happen to you in any definitive sense. And I would just suggest that, what Viktor Frankl had to say is well worth taking to heart. And I would love to hear from folk who watch this. What has made the difference for you in terms of dealing with the anxiety, the fear, and all the rest? I see myself as simply a recycler and facilitator of meaning. Don't have any silver bullet. I don't even own a gun. So I hope that you can... At least I have a better sense of humor than if I get him to laugh. Anyway, thank you, folk, and let this other folk know about this. Post it, forward it. Lastly, just to say, I'm reminded, I just got a message from one of my connections who said, the HSRC is undertaking a COVID-19 survey. We need as many people as possible to participate. Will you please share it with your respective networks? And it's the website is hsrc.ac.za #COVID-19. So there's an opportunity for you to contribute your experience, and that's what's going to get us through. I'm just amazed to see how all this thing is playing itself out, and stay strong and be tough-minded and tender-hearted. Cheers.